Thank you, Mr. Program Director. When I got a clap of hands before I came to the podium, I was saying that it's only the statement we had from the Chair of Council. So we still have to get the numbers. Let's wait, we'll clap hands after the numbers. Let me take note. Let me take note of the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Matamela Ramaphosa, and indeed the Minister in the Presidency, Ms. Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, who the statistics function reports to, and the two Deputy Ministers in the Presidency, Deputy Minister Morolong and Deputy Minister Mutaung, and Deputy Minister Morolong, who has a delegated function of dealing with matters statistics with our arrangements with the Minister. And let me mention that with that responsibility, let me take note again of the Chair of the Statistics Council, members of Parliament here, and indeed members of the public service, the DG in the presidency, Ms. Baleni is here, and I haven't recognized others, and let's just say staff members. I have a responsibility of making sure that we talk about the numbers. But I would like to introduce to all of us Melo Kuhle. As a statistical organization, and Melo Kuhle is standing in front of us here. As a statistical agency, we had to take into account the use of statistics in naming Melo. Melo Kuhle is the most popular name, female baby, that was coming out of our 2021. So every year in recorded live births, what we do is we look at the most popular names all over the country by province, the most popular surnames, and we make them available. And of course, it's quite interesting when you use surnames, Mr. President. There's a lot of interest in saying in some provinces, oh, we know that we are responsible for increasing the population in this province. So there are a lot of interesting things. And as statisticians, we deal with everything about life, about entities. So at this point in time, let me indicate to the media that we are lifting the embargo. I know the media really wants to start showing I know our engagement all the time is that when we meet, we first brief you and then we say embargo lifted. It's because we want to be interactive. So here is Melo in front of us.
Greetings, Statistician-General of South Africa.
Melo, please have manners. Kindly greet everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Melo, will you kindly load the Census 2022 launch presentation?
I will do that gladly, SG, but I think you're forgetting something. Shouldn't we first tell the story of how the count was done?
Oh, Melo, thank you very much for reminding me. Let us talk about how the count was done. Will you please load the video of how the count was done?
As the sun rises from the mountains of Mpumalanga, South Africa rises with strength and hope for a better future and improved socio-economic climate. This is why a census is critical in playing a role in advancing the aspirations of the majority of South Africans. In 2022, South Africa conducted its fourth population census since 1996. A painstaking undertaking, the census provides a true reflection of the country's socio-economic dynamics, its growth, and its development trajectory over time.
Since 1994, we have had 4 population and housing censuses in South Africa. One in 1996, then in 2001, followed by the 2011 one. And indeed, this census that we conducted in February 2022. The scale of a census is incomparable to any other project in the country. and consequently, detailed and accurate planning and testing is essential to effectively execute such a project. We set out to count everyone within the borders of South Africa without omission or duplication.
The people of Newcastle and all other villages, townships, and towns in KwaZulu-Natal were counted. Communities across the province of Mpumalanga were counted. The Basotho people of Putadichaba and the entire province of the Free State were counted. Nwanzeku and the entire province of Limpopo were counted during the census. Mthatha in the Eastern Cape, including Komani, and the entire province participated in the census and were successfully counted. The people of Pampierstad and the rest of the Northern Cape were counted. Western Cape and its citizens were counted. Sandton and the rest of Gauteng were counted. And the people of Dinokana and the rest of the Northwest Province were counted.
This turned out to be one of the toughest challenges due to the complexities in the environment, including COVID-19 and how load shedding impacted on some of our processes. Indeed, I can't overstate the importance of a census for the country. Census 2022 data provides insights on living conditions of South Africans in terms of the number of households, average household sizes, and the type of dwelling structures they live in, as well as access to water, availability of essential services and facilities, as well as access to internet. This information is critical in understanding and addressing development challenges at all levels of geography and community.
As the world enters the fourth industrial revolution, Census 2022 became South Africa's first successful digital population count. A multi-mode data collection approach was adopted and used in the collection of information from respondents. These were face-to-face interviews, telephonic interviews, as well as computer-assisted web interviews. Close to 100,000 field workers were brought on board to administer the census questionnaire. A multi-mode data collection method became an advantage in conducting the census in the COVID-19 pandemic space as strict regulations had been introduced. Censuses provide reliable data at various levels of planning. Information collected during the census process plays a critical role in planning at the national, provincial, and municipal levels by providing policymakers with the information required to formulate rational policies and implement service delivery.
For the next 10 years, this information is going to be important for all our data users. Here I'm talking about our stakeholders in the three spheres of government in the form of policymakers and indeed development partners, civil society organizations, the private sector, researchers, and the general public. In closing, I would like to thank each and everyone who made Census 2022 a success. Our field staff, Census Project Management Team, the Post-Enumeration Team, as well as members of civil society who opened their doors to be counted. I must emphasize that our biggest thanks goes to members of civil society, because without them we would not have been successful. I thank you. Ngiyabonga, enkosi, danki, ndihela kwami. Now, Mr. President, that we have heard the story about how the count was done, we now want to hear the story about the numbers. Melo, please load the Census 2022 presentation. Indeed, if we go to the next slide, Melo, We are saying that in 1996 we used pen and paper. 2001 we used pen and paper and went straight into scanning technology. So was 2011, my apologies. In 2022 we had 3 modes: face-to-face, telephonic and web-assisted, and all of these were digital applications. Melo, let's go to the next slide. And indeed, as we look at this, we are saying that COVID-19 propelled us to go into multimodal approach. And as we did this, we were affected in both census planning and implementation. One of the biggest challenges is that the 10th of October, and by coincidence, Mr. President, we were given this day, used to be a census night. And that's when we would go into field, 1996, 2001, and 2011. But as of now, 2022, we had to go into field in February. And that would mean that there are so many challenges. October was chosen largely because we know the students are in their home, the provinces where they are schooling in. But in February, some hadn't returned. And of course, even when we extended the period, the reference night still would not include some of them. So these are some of the data issues we will have to live with. We have had some provinces coming and say, Mr. SG, we have a number of students, take this data and include it. We cannot. It has to be contained. It cannot be influenced by any other approach. It has to be done by State SA. So let us look at quality measures in the next slide, Melo. As we look at quality measures, we are saying that we had to build in validation rules to make sure that we monitor our enumeration throughout, minimal editing and imputations, and make sure that we had an independent team of experts. Council had their team. We also had our team that assessed and indeed evaluated the processes of data processing. And in the process, validation through census processes that occurred in the past. Next slide, Melo. What happened? We can tell the nation our collection rates. So in every province, in the Free State, our collection rates, that is the number of dwelling units we were able to reach, set at 98%, all the way to the Western Cape at 86%. Having said this, we could arrive in a dwelling and find that it's vacant. We could arrive in a dwelling and find that there is nobody, especially in situations where you find you have single households and the neighbors are not supposed to respond on their behalf. So these are some of the things we had to deal with. And now let us look at the post-enumeration survey. Next slide, Melo. In the post-enumeration survey, this is an independent survey that deals with the quality in terms of evaluation of the census, to deal with coverage error, content error, and indeed to give us an informed basis, a statistically informed basis for adjusting the census count. Next slide, Melo. Now, when we come to this slide, we talk about the undercount. I want to say that when we talk about the undercount, everyone starts to worry. We are talking about having reached 98% in the Free State, and now we are saying that the persons undercount is sitting at 20% in the 20.95%. But let us look at the Western Cape, 35.58% at persons level, 36.3% at household level. Eastern Cape, 32.4% and 27.24% at household level. All the way to Limpopo. They are not ranked in terms of the standing. It's the way we have listed them. And the undercount for South Africa is 31.06%. And we use the persons as the headline undercount. But I don't want us to spend time on the undercount, because when we talk about the undercount, everyone says, these are the people that have been missed. We use this using the post-enumeration survey to adjust the population census accordingly. So the adjustments for provinces won't be the same. That is why you look at the provinces with the higher undercounts. It means they will have higher adjustments when we are dealing with adjustments out of what we got and what we are adjusting. And this is done in line with the United Nations methods. And that makes sure that we have the quality of our data guaranteed, and the veracity of our data to stand the test of time, so that in future, even 400 years from now, those who will use our data will know that one day we gathered in this room and our data can still stand the test of time. Now, let us look at the next slide, Melo. We looked mainly in the quality in population group, sex, age group, marital status, relationship to the head of the household, country of birth. And of course, we looked at an aggregated index of consistency, and we are pleased to indicate that no characteristics showed a higher aggregated index of consistency. That is, they were low or moderate. Next slide, Melo. Now, having spoken about the next slide, we want to talk about the population of South Africa. We know now how much was done in terms of the counting, in terms of the people that we have missed, that we could not find even when we arrived at their households. Now, Melo, can you tell us what the total population of South Africa is as of the 2nd of February 2022?
No, I cannot. I am not the Statistician-General. Only the Statistician-General can release the numbers.
I'm sorry, Melo. I actually forgot that you are just standing next to the Statistician-General. Now, let's go to the next slide and say the population of South Africa as of the 2nd of February 2022 was 62.027 million. And of course, we can show how our population grew over time. Next slide, Melo. We can say that in 1996, there were 40.6 million, and we grew by 10.4% into 2001, where we were sitting at 44.8 million. In 2001 to 2011, we grew by by 15.5% straight into 51.8 million. And the increase between 2011 and 2022, the increase was 19.8%, which represented 10.3 million persons, and it took us to 62.027 million. Now, we want to look at the provinces, Melo. Let's go into the next slide. Let us look at the provinces. KwaZulu-Natal as of 1996 was the most populous province. It was followed by Gauteng. 2001, KwaZulu-Natal state. In 2011, it was overtaken by Gauteng. As we can see that Gauteng went all the way to 2022 sitting at 15.1 million, followed by KwaZulu-Natal at 12.4 million. But of interest is the Western Cape, which was number 5 in 1996. 2001, the same. It came after KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Eastern Cape, and Limpopo. In 2011, it overtook Limpopo. And of course, now it has overtaken the Eastern Cape. It's sitting at 7.4 million, followed by the Eastern Cape, sitting at 7.2 million, 6.4 million, let me indicate 7.4 million is the Western Cape, Eastern Cape 7.2 million, Limpopo 6.4 million, Mpumalanga 5.1 million, the Northwest 3.8 million, 3 million goes to the Free State, and the Northern Cape, as usual, it has the largest land mass. It's sitting at 1.4 million. Let us go to the next slide, Melo. We want to talk about demographics. And let us go again to the next slide, Melo. Indeed, let us look at black Africans. They are sitting at 50.5 million. That is, they account for 81.4% of the population. Colored population group, 5.1 million, accounting for 8.1%. And indeed, let us look at the white population group, 4.5 million accounting for 7.3%, and the Indian Asians, 1.7 million accounting for 2.7%, and other, those who didn't specify at 200,000. But of interest is the white population group. When we look at 2011, they were sitting at 9%. They have now declined to 7.3%. Now, let us go into the next slide, Melo. The next slide gives us age cohorts. Children 0 to 14 years sitting at 16.4 million, accounting for 26.4%. Young people 15 to 34 years accounting for 21.6 million, sitting at 34.8%. Adults 35 to 59 years accounting for 8 million, sitting at 29%. The elderly, the 60 years plus, sitting at 6.1 million, accounting for 9.8%. Melo, we want to talk about how many official languages that you speak.
As a recent immigrant to South Africa, I only speak English. I am hopeful one day I will speak all 12 official South African languages.
Melo, will you then take us to the next slide so that we can talk about the languages? I want us to look at the map first. When we look at the map, we might think that Afrikaans is the most spoken language because we see the color for Afrikaans in the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. But we know that the Northern Cape is sparsely populated. It doesn't have much people. So now we want to start with the most spoken language. That is isiZulu, 24.4%. And we can see it's predominantly in KwaZulu-Natal, a bit in Mpumalanga, and of course some parts of the Free State. We can see it, we can look at the blue color. isiXhosa, largely in the Eastern Cape, a bit in KwaZulu-Natal, a bit in the Northern Cape. Followed by Afrikaans, sitting at 10.6%, as we can see, the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. Let us look at Sepedi, mainly in Limpopo, sitting at 10%. Let us look at English, sitting at 8.7%. And of course, let us look at Setswana, mainly in the Northwest, sitting at 8.3%. Sesotho, mainly in the Free State, 7.8%. Xitsonga, mainly in Limpopo, 4.7%. Siswati, 2.8%, mainly in Mpumalanga. Chivenda, sitting at 2.5%, mainly in Limpopo. Isindebele, 1.7%, mainly in Mpumalanga. The sign language is 0.02%, and other, we can see 2.1%. These are those that speak other languages other than the main languages we speak in South Africa. But we can see the gray colors in the provinces. It's where 2 or more languages were staking their claim and there was no outright dominance. And we can see in other parts of our country where they are showing. Now, let us proceed. We talk about migration, Melo. In the next slide, I will ask Melo to take us again to the next slide. In the next slide, we are saying that Gauteng received a net amount of 400,000 between 2011 and 2022. And we can see it was followed by the Western Cape, followed by Mpumalanga, followed by the Northern Cape. The other provinces in the form of the Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and Limpopo had a positive negative net migration. It means that they actually over time are showing reversals. Their population is growing, but in terms of the movements, they are showing that they haven't gained as much as we can see in Gauteng. Now, we want to see largely in the 2 provinces where people are moving to. Next slide, Melo. We can see that in Gauteng, the population growth is driven by people who come from outside South Africa. Actually, about 50% of people who come from outside South Africa choose Gauteng as their destination. Internally, the population of Gauteng, the biggest contribution from provinces comes from Limpopo, followed by KwaZulu-Natal, followed by the Northwest and the Eastern Cape. Whereas when we look at the Western Cape on the right-hand side, we can see that the Eastern Cape, Gauteng, and people from outside South Africa are making an almost equal contribution to the Western Cape. Now, Melo, let us go into the next slide. Let us look at the top 5 sending countries. And we can say that they were the same between the 2 periods as in 2011 and 2022. Whereas in 2011, those who came from Zimbabwe were sitting at 38.1% and now sitting at 45.5%. And of course, Coming from Mozambique, 22%, 2011, now sitting at 18.7%. And Lesotho, 9.1%, in 2011, sitting at 10.2%. Malawi, 4.9%, 2011, and indeed 8.9% now. And the United Kingdom was sitting at 4.1% in 2011, now sitting at 2.8%. I must say, Mr. President, the staff members of Statistician-General were saying that if we could release the numbers, we could not release the numbers. When the president was in Musina with the president of Zimbabwe, you would have liked to take these numbers along, but not even the president has presight to these numbers. He's limited. They are kept by the Statistician-General. Let us look at education in the next slide, Melo. And again, move us to the next slide. We are saying, when we look at 0 to 4, we are saying that 6 out of 10 children aged 0 to 4 years had access to some form of early childhood development program. The gray color on the left says that nothing, they don't have any opportunity. But from the green colors all the way, it's either at a crèche, a preschool, a daycare center, sitting with a gogo, or a day mother or a gogo, or a home, or a community playground. We are saying that 6 out of 10, about 60%. But the challenges were more in the Northern Cape and the Northwest, where we can see that those who had no opportunity for early childhood development are sitting at more than 50%, right at the bottom. Let us look further in terms of education in the next slide. We are saying that the percentage of persons aged 20 years and older who completed secondary education more than doubled from 16.3% in 1996 to 37.6% in 2022. Let us look at the bar, on the second bar from the right-hand side. We can see that it's shooting up. And it's largely, when we look at the others, no schooling, it's declining. Completed primary schooling, it's declining. Some secondary declining. So it means we are seeing more people who have completed secondary school in the form of grade 12. And again, they are moving to post-school. And as they move on the extreme right, we can see that post-school has moved from 7.1% in 1996 to 12.2% in 2022. Let us look at the next slide. In terms of prevalence of disability, we have seen declines from 7.4% in 2011 to 6% in 2022. We want to now look at housing and households. Let us look at the next slide. And we want to go further into the next slide again. Let us look in 1996, we had 9.1 million households in South Africa. 2001, we were sitting at 11.2 million, having increased by 23.7%. 2011, we went up to 14.4 million, having increased by 28.9%. And indeed, 2022, we have gone to 17.8 million, having grown by 23.4%. And we can see that from 1996, we have doubled in the number of households that we have in South Africa. Now, let us look at housing in the next slide. Households that resided in formal dwellings increased sharply from 2011, having been sitting at about 77.6%. But when we look at 1996, they were sitting at 65.1%. We can see all the way to 88.5%. And as formal housing increases, we are seeing a decline in traditional housing and informal housing. Of course, Mr. President, when we bring these numbers, we bring them without taste buds. Our job is to bring numbers. I can see some nodding in the room, and I can see this nodding doesn't work with statisticians. We only bring the numbers. because we bring both the good and the bad news. The statistics about the good, the ugly, and the bad, and we tell all of them. Now, let us look at service delivery in the next slide. And Melo, will you please take us to the next slide and look at electricity? In the form of access to electricity for lighting in South Africa, not lightning, lighting. And here, Mr. President, Minister, and members of the public, I don't want us to be caught up into the disruptions of load shedding. It's what members of the public have told us about the main source of energy for lighting. Whether it's there or it's disrupted or not, this is what they told us. So let us look at 1996. It was just some pockets that were yellow in the Western Cape. There's a place called Mkanyakude in KwaZulu-Natal. When you are at night, there's this tree that actually glows amber or yellow from far. So Mkanyakude was only in the Western Cape. In 2001, the Western Cape was universal. And in 2011, we could see the whole country was making it. As of 2022, almost the whole country is sitting between 80 and 100%. And indeed, only one municipality, eMadlangeni, fell below 80%. So, Mr. President, it's not my space to say it, but if we could solve the load shedding challenge, the people are already ready to switch on their lights at any given moment because the infrastructure is there. That's what they told us. We don't make up these stories at Stats SA. Members of the public tell us, Mr. President. And because they tell us all these stories, they also tell us the stories about water. Next slide. Now, let us look at water. In relation to water, we can see coming out of 1996, there were challenges in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal and some parts of the Northwest and parts of Limpopo. We made some improvements in 2001 all the way to 2011, but we have actually gone back largely in Limpopo and the Eastern Cape. This doesn't talk to disruptions. The disruptions that are there where they don't have electricity, water are there, but here is about access to piped water, either inside a dwelling or in their yard. So they are saying that if we get water to these taps, they will actually have water. In the next slide, we are talking about in 2022, over 4/5, that is 82.4% of households in the country had access to piped water either inside their dwelling or inside their yard. As we can see that we are saying 59.7 inside the dwelling and all the way where we had no access, we are just sitting at 8.7. Next slide, Melo. Over the period 1996 to 2022, the percentage of households with no access to piped water halved from 19.7% to 8.7%. And indeed, when we look at South Africa in the middle, on the left-hand side, we can see that. Now, let us look at the next slide. Households that resided in the Western Cape and Gauteng had greater access of flush toilets, sitting at 93.9% and 89.7% respectively. And we can see that there were issues in Limpopo where Limpopo had 3 times the amount of pit latrines without ventilation than the average, the national average. Let us look at agriculture in the next slide. Before we talk about what the purpose was, we can see that households in Limpopo and the Eastern Cape were active or participated in agricultural activities, sitting at 28.7% and 26.2% respectively, all the way to the Western Cape at 2.4%. But when we look at the purpose, let us look at the Western Cape at the bottom. We can see that the Western Cape, 21.9% produced only for sale, and those that produced mainly for sale, and some consumptions were sitting at 13.6% in the Western Cape, and of course, those who produce mainly for consumption and some sale were sitting at 7.1%. Now, let me thank you, Melo, and as I thank you, we have now seen how we have moved, and we really appreciate the value that you have actually assisted us. Please, Melo, may you assist me in launching the Census web portal.
It is my honor to launch the Census 2022 web portal on your behalf, SG.
Melo, will you please take us to the next slide, because the program director here wants me to conclude. This slide, which says Ndihela Kwala, and members of the media, you have to hear this story. This story that says Ndihela Kwala goes in one of our languages in Xitsonga. When I was growing up in the village as a little boy, we could read and write. Our mothers could not read and write. Our fathers were migrant workers in urban centers all over the country. So we had to be the scribes of our mothers when the letters came from Johannesburg or anywhere else. Our mothers and fathers had to find a standard way of concluding a letter. They could not end a letter with, "I love you, my husband," because those words, as their children, we were not supposed to hear them. If we heard them, according to village legend, we were going to go deaf. And we were not supposed to write them down, because if we wrote them down on behalf of our mothers, according to village legend, we were going to get blind. Because there's no way children would hear their mother telling their father, "I love you" or "I miss you." So mothers and fathers had to find a way amongst the Batsonga of ending the letter to say, "Ndihela Kwala." Many of us will remember the Bavenda would say Ndifela Hanef. The Batswana would say Kifetsa Honafa. The Bapedi would say Kifetsa Honamo. And of course, the East Xhosa speaking people would say Ngiceda khona apha ngomkhulu umbuliso. And the Basotho would say Kaditumediso na watsina. And those who speak isiZulu would say that ngiceda khona lapha, but mainly they would not write it that way. They would say amaningyang now. So even myself, amaningyang now. But let me mention that never, Mr. President, and never again, President Mandela once said, should we let any section of our society, be it men, women, children, or any other person based on their skin color, be excluded such that they cannot even express themselves on issues that matter the most to them. Matter the most to them, like love, where they can't even say to someone, "I love you" or "I miss you," because they have to express that through a proxy. Because we have numbers that tell a story, and we cannot use them sufficiently enough. Let me assure you, Mr. President, Minister, Deputy Ministers, Chair of Councils, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that my next slide is blank. If Melo could take me to the next slide, I would assure that is blank.